Okay, so you'll have an opportunity. You can use the existing login that you have, and then you can use your password. If you don't use a password today, if you use a token, then you can simply just put in your login ID and log in. So we'll go ahead and log in. And the first screen that we're going to come to is going to request to receive a secure access code. The contact information you see on the screen should be your contact information. So you have an opportunity to receive either a text message, an email, or a voice call. So in this instance, we'll go ahead and click on text. And you should receive the code just within a few seconds. Okay, so I just received it. And you should expect a 6-digit numeric character code. Okay, and we'll go ahead and enter that in. And then next what will happen is you'll be asked to register your device. If you're using a device or a computer that is your own, then of course you want to register it so that you're not requested to receive a secure access code every time. If it's a device that is a public computer or laptop, then you'll want to not register it for security purposes. So we'll go ahead and click on register. Okay, so let me go ahead and just go back to the home screen here. All right, so now the first thing that you also want to be aware of is that as part of a first-time user experience, this is an existing user, you're actually going to be asked to set a new password. So you'll expect that during the time of login as well. So once you log in, you're going to come to the home screen. And the home screen is going to contain a listing of your accounts. Now, one thing I do want to point out, and in fact, I'll actually just bring this back up here, and we'll go ahead and show this is how the accounts are going to look when you log in. They'll all be grouped together, and you do have an opportunity, if you need, to separate accounts into groupings. And the way you'll do that is you can click on any one of your accounts and drag it. You'll see a little blue envelope at the bottom right. Just drag it and drop it right into that envelope. So at this point now, what we can do is we can rename our new group. So let's say, for instance, we want to call this company B. Click on the check mark. And then, in addition, you can take additional accounts and either drag them into this existing group, or you could also create a whole new group as well. On the top right-hand side, you'll see where you have the Transfer Money Now option. This is a shortcut to funds transfers. And then Commercial Transactions is a shortcut to the ACH and Wire screen. On the right-hand side, towards the bottom, you'll also see the Gulf Coast Bank and Trust Facebook feed off of their Facebook page. On the top right-hand side, you'll also see here we have a printer icon where you can print a listing of your accounts. And then you'll see the 3 horizontal dots. If you click here, it'll give you 2 options. You can see the activity on the account, which is a shortcut to the next screen, or you can also do a quick transfer. So I'll click here. You'll notice that my From account is already pre-filled in. Simply just choose your To account, enter the dollar amount, and click on Transfer Funds. Next, we're going to click on one of these accounts and actually go into the account history and details. So it's just a single click right here on anywhere on one of these accounts. And first, you're going to notice that you have a listing of transaction history, of course, both pending and posted, newest up on top. And if you click on any one of these transactions, you'll have an opportunity to view the details. Notice that there are a couple items here that have a little icon that looks like a check. This means that there's an associated image for this transaction. So we'll click right here on this transaction, and you'll see the front and also the back of this image. You can click on Print, and this will give you an opportunity to print the front and back of this image. And then also you can click on the blurb, and this is what we call our transaction inquiry. This is a secure message that you can send to Gulf Coast Bank and Trust, and all you'll need to do is enter in just your message as far as what your question is, you'll notice at the bottom and the top, everything is all pre-filled in for you in regards to this transaction. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see a link that says supported attachments. If you click here, this gives you an opportunity to view what type of attachments are also supported if you needed to send a file or a document. Click on the paperclip, and this will open up a browse box, and you can just select your file or your document and click on open. Once you're done, simply click on send. Up on the top right, you'll see here there's an option for export. The little down arrow, you click on it. This is where you have the option to export either into a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet. In addition, you can also print a listing of your transactions, and just like we did with the transaction inquiry, we can also initiate an account inquiry as well. This would be specific to the account as opposed to an individual transaction. Same method applies. Simply put in your message, the supported attachments. The supported attachments are going to be the same across the board for all types of secure messages. Same thing with the paperclip. You can attach the document or file using the paperclip, enter your message, and click on send. If we click on filters, this will give you an opportunity to filter out your transactions based upon various criteria. If you click on the time period, you'll notice you can search by various time periods, including custom date range, transaction type, dollar range, or check number range. Click on apply filters, and you'll only see those transactions at the bottom after clicking on the filter. At that point, you have the opportunity then, if you want to export or print, as I mentioned, those specific transactions. The last item on the screen is going to be the details. If I click here, this is a listing of the account details that are corresponding with this specific account. Next, we'll click on the Messages menu. First thing I'd like to point out is on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a red indicator with a number. This is an indicator telling you how many unread messages that you have waiting for you within the secure messaging. In addition to your account inquiry and your transaction inquiry, you also have the opportunity to create a general secure message as well. On the right-hand side, click on New Message, and then you simply click on the drop-down, determine which of the mailboxes you would like to send the message to, enter in your subject, a message. Once again, you have the opportunity to attach a document or a file, and then click on Send. On the left-hand side over here, you'll notice that all of your incoming and outgoing secure messages will be listed, newest up on top, and then the bold ones are the ones that have not yet been opened. You have the opportunity also to either delete out one at a time, or you can also delete out all at one time as far as your secure messages. So next we'll go into the transfer funds. Now be aware that right now it does not show up, but under the transfer funds menu is also going to be, when you go live, is going to be the bill pay option. So you will see that when you go live next week in the new online banking. The first thing we're going to talk about is funds transfers. Funds transfers is an opportunity for you to do a single, same day, future dated, or a or a recurring transaction within the online banking. Simply select the from and the to, enter the dollar amount. If this needs to be a recurring transaction, click on the check mark, and then designate how often this transaction should repeat. Enter in a start date, and designate either an end date, or you can click on repeat forever if this needs to repeat indefinitely. At the bottom, you can also enter in an optional memo, and then click on approve. The next screen is going to be the Activity Center. This screen is important because this screen will give you all of the historical transactions that have been initiated from within specifically the new online banking system. At the bottom, you'll see a listing of all of the transactions, and you can click on any one of these, and you have an opportunity to view the details. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see also the transaction process in regards to where in the process this transaction is currently statused. You'll notice that this transaction was canceled yesterday at 1:41 p.m. On the right-hand side, you'll also see that there's a listing of actions. If I click the drop-down, you can inquire about the account or about the transaction. This is the same as if we were inquiring on one of the accounts or transactions in the account detail page. Simply click here. It pre-fills in all the details, enter in your message, attach a document or a file if needed, and then click on send. In addition, you can also export out your transactions, and you can also print the listing of the transactions as well. Right here in the middle, we're going to click on filters. Just like with the account history, you have an opportunity to filter by various criteria when we're looking at online transactions. You can filter by the transaction type, by the status, and I'm going to explain a couple of items here in this dropdown. This is very important to understand in relation to online transactions being initiated from within online banking. An authorized transaction has been fully approved and is currently authorized for Gulf Coast Bank and Trust to process the transaction. A drafted transaction means that the transaction has been initiated, but we're still waiting for additional approval before it can be fully authorized for processing. And then a transaction that's been processed means that it's been completed and can no longer be canceled. Any transaction that is in authorized or drafted status can be canceled up until the point that it's been processed. You can also search by the account that the transaction was drawn on. If you have multiple users within online banking for your company, you could also search by who initiated the transaction, the date range. You'll notice that each transaction that's initiated will have an automatic tracking ID assigned to it. You can search by this transaction ID, and then also by an amount range as well. Click on apply, and then only those transactions you're searching for will show up on the bottom. Now, at the moment, you're not going to see, but you're going to notice that the merchant capture is going to be an additional item that is going to be a main menu in between the transfer funds and commercial menus. So this is where if you are, or if you're scanning checks and essentially depositing them, you essentially can look, you'll see that it's going to be called merchant capture when you go live. And as I mentioned, it'll be in between your transfer funds and your commercial menu. So next we'll click on locations. First, branches and ATMs. And if I click on one of these branches, okay, it's going to give me an opportunity to view the lobby hours, the drive-through hours, and also get directions as well. And you also notice if I close this, it's also going to give me a listing of other branches as well. If I pan out, you'll see now where all the branches are located. In addition, you can also click on ATMs. Next, we'll click on Community Cash. This will open up, you'll notice, an additional window. So it's not taking us out of online banking, just opening an additional browser window. And this will bring us to the Community Cash Locator. So next, under Services, we'll start with Stop Payment. Simply select the account on the right-hand side, enter the check number, click on Save, enter the payee name, click on Set, enter the check amount, click on Save, enter the date of the check, and then also the reason for the stop payment. Click on Save, or Set, and then click on Send Request when everything has been completed. Next, we'll click on View Statements and Notices. Up here on the top, you'll have an opportunity to click on your specific account, and then you'll see a listing of available dates for that account as far as the statements, and then click on Get Statement. That will then appear, that will allow your statement to come up on the screen. Next, we'll talk about address change. This is an opportunity for you to change the address on one, multiple, or all of your accounts. select the accounts that correspond, put the address change right here on the right-hand side, and then click on Submit. Next, under User Preferences, we'll talk about account preferences. First off, you'll click on one of these accounts, and you'll see here where right now it says Dave Checking 3. If I click on the pencil, this gives me an opportunity to provide a nickname. I've already nicknamed this account, but you can essentially enter a nickname, and also keep in mind that each user of the company will be entitled to their own account preferences. So I can change this if I want, or I can leave this as is. And then when you finish setting up your account nickname, click on the Save. In addition, you'll also see here where you can make any account either visible or you can hide it from view. Click on the Visible toggle button. It's going to give you a warning, and then proceed if you'd like to move forward. Next, we'll talk about alerts. So the first thing I'd like to point out is under Security Alerts. If I click on the expander, you'll notice that there are 37 alerts, and some of these are clickable, where you can turn them on and off as you choose. So such as this one right here, I can click, and it allows me to turn it off. Now others are more critical, and these will remain on at all times, and you'll notice that they're grayed out. I can click also on Edit Delivery Preferences, and this gives me an opportunity to decide where and how I'd like to receive my security alerts if I'd like to make any changes. I can enter in the information and then click on Save. Up on the top right-hand side, you'll see an option for a new alert. If I click on this, these are 3 different types of alerts you can also subscribe to. We'll start with account alerts. And be aware that the workflow we're about to go through corresponds to all types of alerts, not just the account alerts, but we'll go through each one of them. So first off, let's say we want to set up an alert based on a specific account, and we want to also select available balance in this case. Let's say we want it to tell us when we've gone below $100. Click on Save, and then we have to decide, do we want to receive only a secure message within online banking? Do we want to receive an email, a phone call, or a text message? So let's say we want to receive a text message. Enter the phone number in here for the cell phone, and then click on either Send Immediately, which means that it'll be sent to you immediately upon occurring, or you can decide what time you'd like to receive the alert. So for instance, we'll say 9:00 a.m., and that's going to be in Central Time. Click on Agree to Terms, and then either A, you can set it up so that you'll receive it every single time, or if I uncheck this box, you'll receive that alert only one time the next time it occurs. Once you're done, click on Save, and then you're done. Click on Back to Alerts, and now we'll talk about posted transaction alerts. Now in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to select an account, and let's say, for example, we're waiting for a specific check number to clear the account. We can click here on check number and enter the check number, hit Save, and then the rest of the format is exactly the same. Decide how you like to receive it, send immediately or a specific time, and then every occurrence or just the next occurrence. And then the last type of alert is an online transaction alert. This is where, for example, you can set up an alert based on, so let's say, for instance, domestic wire. And maybe you want to select a certain account and know when a wire transaction has been drafted by somebody in the company. And then once again, decide how you'd like to receive that alert. Next, we'll talk about security preferences. This is where you have an opportunity once you've logged in if you want to change your password. And you'll see that the password requirements are down here at the bottom. You can change your login ID. Also click on Secure Delivery. And this is where you have an opportunity to decide whether or not you'd like to change, add, or delete that exist for the secure access to security alerts that are coming through the secure access codes, I apologize, that are coming through when you're logging in. Down here at the bottom, we also have the help menu. This is where, once again, it opens up in a new window, and you have the opportunity to view the various topics for additional information. And notice we're still within online banking if I close this out. So that is the last part of the basic functionality we're going to cover. And now we're going to go into our commercial functionality. So we're going to start here under commercial. And we're going to start and talk about what's called recipients. But before I start talking about the functionality, one thing I do want to point out that if anybody is using the ACH file editor along with the work file that you're currently using to import in, the recipients, which are essentially the individuals or companies that are recipients of those ACHs, the listing of those recipients will automatically be imported into the new online banking system, and you'll see a listing of them here when you log in. If you do have that working file, you will not need to recreate them. But what you will be doing, though, is when we get to the ACH and wires and get into the templates, you will have the opportunity to create what's called a template and utilize that going forward as opposed to using the working file. So the first thing we're going to do with recipients is I'm going to show how you can create a brand new one for future reference. So we can click on Add Recipient. And the first item is going to be display name. Now, this value is the value that you'll use to reference this recipient when linking them to an ACH or a wire within a one-time payment, or if you're linking them to a template. So for that matter, for example, if you have employee ID numbers, we can say EID 66667. Okay, so now as far as the value that gets placed into the actual ACH or wire file itself, these are the fields that control that. So we're going to say David Smith. And you also have the opportunity to enter in an optional ACH ID. Typically, this is going to be the Social Security number or tax ID of the recipient. So we'll just put a value in here and then enter an email address. Now, when we click on Send Email Notifications, what this will do is this is going to give you an opportunity to have an automatic email sent to, in this case, David Smith, at the point when David Smith is included in an ACH or a wire that's being processed by Gulf Coast Bank and Trust. So the email gets sent out at that point in time when the transaction is being processed. At the bottom, you'll see a listing of address information, and this is going to be an optional fields if you choose to fill these in. But next, we're going to click on the Next button, because what we need to do is we need to add at least one account to our recipient. So you'll see here there's three different options. This is to determine whether or not we want to allow this account to be used for ACH only, ACH and wire, or wire only. Now, watch what happens on the bottom of the screen when we select the different options. So if we select ACH only, the beneficiary and intermediary FI information is no longer appearing because it doesn't correspond with ACH. Same thing if I click on wire only, your ACH routing number is no longer appearing. So it's going to adapt according to what you select. So in this case, we're going to say ACH and wire both, and this is going to be, for reference, this is your recipient's account. So we'll put in here, for example, checking account, enter an account number, and then this item here is our financial institution lookup. This is where you can either enter in the financial institution name or the ABA number of that financial institution for your recipient, and it will automatically bring up a listing of financial institutions. So for example, let's say I want to put in Capital Bank. Okay, so here is Capital Bank right here. And watch what happens when I click on this item. It automatically fills in all of the information as far as the ACH and also the wire information. So at this point, I'm complete. I can scroll down to the bottom And either A, I can click on Save Recipient, or I can add an additional account as well. So for this matter, we'll go ahead and add another account. And let's say this account is going to be used for payroll, and where we're going to want to split the funds between a checking and a savings account. So let's go ahead and add a savings account. And then let's say we'll go ahead and just use a different account or a different bank this time. So we'll click on this one right here. And now I can scroll down to the bottom and click on Save Recipient. Okay, so now we have our recipient, but keep in mind also that the new online banking system is what's called a unified user experience. And what this means is that regardless of whether or not you're on a desktop or a laptop, a mobile device, or a tablet, you'll have the same exact experience as far as the workflows, as far as the options. What I'm showing right here is going to be exactly the same. So for that matter, what we've done is we've built in two different views so that if you are on a tablet as opposed to a desktop, you might decide that the tabular view is going to be a little bit easier to work with. So depending on what your needs are, you can select between the two views. So next we're going to go into ACH and wires. Now, for reference, once again, if you are using that ACH file editor and have that working file, what's going to happen, as I mentioned, is that you'll have a listing of your recipients that will be imported in. You don't have to worry about creating those again. But what will happen is you're going to want to link them to a template so that then you can set it up for recurring payments or set it up for future use. So the way you're going to do that is I'll show everybody how to create. We'll do another payroll template just for example. So I'll click on New Template and we'll click on Payroll. The first screen gives me an opportunity to name my template. So let's say, for instance, we want to do weekly payroll. Okay, so next we'll click on recipient amount, or I can also click on the next screen that brings me to the next item as well. So here you'll see a listing. This is where you'll see that listing of those existing recipients that have been ported in based upon what's being imported into the current system through your working file. So what we're going to do is let's click on one of these recipients, and we're going to tie this or link this recipient to this new template. So I'll click right here. And it brings me to a screen that's going to say which account or accounts do I want to be included in this template. So let's say, for example, we want to have our primary account being the checking account and the secondary account being the savings. So I'll click here on Split. This will give me an opportunity then to decide my primary. I'll say my primary is going to be my checking, and my savings account is going to be my secondary. So once I have that designated, I can click on OK. So at this point, here's our recipient, here's our two accounts, but now what we need to do first is we need to designate what the total dollar amount is going to be for the transaction. The way to do that is to click here on the link. It rolls everything up into one line, and you'll enter in the total dollar amount, so $1,000. Now what I need to do is I need to decide how much needs to go into my secondary, and then the residual will be in my primary. So I'll click back on my two accounts, and you'll see this is my primary and this is my secondary. So watch what happens here when I start entering in a value. So let's say, for instance, we wanted to do $100 in our secondary account. Automatically, the amount is reduced here in our primary account. So now at this point in time, I've set up this recipient and also linked it to this template. If I click on Show All, this is going to show me all the rest of my recipients that I can also link up to this template as well. So we'll go ahead and link up this one here. And let's say in this case, we'll do only the checking account. So we have two recipients. I'll just click here. And then essentially then what we've done is we only have the linked recipients showing. So now we're ready to get to the next step. So now we'll click on subsidiary. So this is only for any company that has more than one tax ID. If you only have one tax ID, then you will not see this option. It will go directly from recipient amount over to the account option. But in this case, we'll select the subsidiary, the tax ID that needs to go into the, essentially the tax ID that needs to go into the file, and then click on account. this is where we need to decide what the offset account is for that ACH transaction. So let's click on this one right here, and then click on Review and Submit. This is the final step of this process. So we'll scroll down. Whoops. I'll scroll down, and you'll see here where we have the summary of the selected recipients. We have the 2 recipients, one with 2 accounts, and one with just 1. And also be aware that if you need to send out a pre-note to validate a new account, you can just send it out as a $0 amount. But right now, we're just creating a template for future use. So at this point now, we'll click on Save. Okay, this is a test environment, so essentially what should happen is it should then create that actual template itself. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to log off real quick and log back on. Looks like my session was about to expire. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click on Commercial, and let's click on ACH and Wires. All right, so we have a listing of existing payroll templates or existing templates. And what we're going to do next is work with that template in order to be able to create a file. But one thing I do want to mention is that if I click here on the dropdown, regardless of whether or not I'm working with an ACH batch, which is multiple ACH credits, an ACH collection, which is multiple ACH debits, wires, or payroll, what I just showed as far as that workflow is exactly the same regardless. So what I'll do is I'll click on one of these. I'll click on this one right here. And we're going to go through just real quick and create an actual file based upon this template that we've already set up. So I'll click on recipient amount. And let's say, for instance, here's our recipient. And you'll notice here there's a pay column. Okay, the pay column is going to designate which recipients need to be tied, or should I say, which recipients need to be included in this file that's going to be sent out for processing. Now, of course, in this case, we only have one recipient, so I can easily click right here. Okay, but if you have hypothetically 100 employees that you're paying through online banking, it's going to be a lot more tedious to click on each one individually. Instead, what you would do is you would just click on the Pay All option, and that would select all of the recipients tied to this template. So once we've done that, then we can just go through the rest of the workflow. You'll notice everything is already selected. I'll go right through here to the end, and now we need to select the effective date of the transaction. So let's say we want to select the 27th, and then also, if it's a payroll, you might decide that you want this to be automatically kicked off every other week or every week, depending on what the cycle is. So in this case, we can click on Set Schedule, and let's pretend that we have 1st and 15th of the month, and then we can make it repeat forever, or we can make it repeat until a specified date. Once we're done, we can go to the bottom, and then you'll actually be able to click on Approve, and that will essentially create that transaction, and we'll set it up for processing. So next, we're going to click on ACH and Wires, and we've talked about templates. We've also talked about recipients, but now let's discuss one-time payments. So over here on the right-hand side, we can click on New Payment, and the first type I'd like to talk about would be domestic wires. So we'll click on Domestic Wire, and for this example, let's say that instead of utilizing an existing recipient, let's say we have a scenario where you have the need to send money to a person or to a company that is a one-time only situation. It never has been before, and you don't ever anticipate sending money to them again. So the easiest way to do this is to click on New Recipient right here within the workflow. And then this should look very familiar. So this is the same screen that we looked at beforehand, but when we get to the next screen, you're going to see an additional option available at the very bottom. So we'll say here, one-time recipient. And we'll click on Next. And in this case here, it's going to be wire only, of course, because you're already working through a wire transaction. We'll enter in the account number and then enter the financial institution. And then at the bottom, you'll see that there's an additional option that says use without save. So what this will do is this will use this recipient only for this one transaction, but it will not save it in the listing of recipients going forward. So I can click on use without save, enter my dollar amount in. And since my limit is not set up, we'll just go ahead and just keep it at 0 for the time being. Okay, go through to the next screen, decide what the offsetting account's going to be, review and submit, enter your process date, which could be today if it's before the cutoff time. And at the bottom, then we would go ahead and click on draft or approve, depending on your entitlement. And that would create the actual transaction for the wire. So next, we're going to talk about file import. Click on ACH and wires once again under commercial. On the right-hand side, you have an option for new payment, and you're going to click on payment from file. There's two different scenarios. The first scenario is if you have a third-party software that generates an ACH file or a Nacha formatted file, you can use payment from file to import that in. But this specifically needs to be a single batch file and also needs to contain either a PPD or a CCD class code. Those are strictly the requirements for this screen. So we'll click here on select the payment type, and we'll click on, for example, payroll. At the bottom, you'll then have an opportunity to click on select the file to import. And you can also then click on the single batch Nacha file, click on open, and then you click on upload file. In addition, you'll see a reference to a 5-column CSV. Now, keep in mind, this is not the working file that you're working with today. This would be brand new to where if you wanted to import in a listing of transactions or recipients into the system in order to essentially generate a file, what you can do is you could click on, I'll go ahead and click on the sample so you can see what this looks like. So now the format of this 5-column CSV file is always going to be in the same order and the same information. The ACH recipient, the ABA number for that recipient, the account number, the account type, which is going to be either a 1, 2, or 3, which is checking, savings, loan, and all the information is out there on the screen. You don't have to worry about memorizing it. And then the last column is going to be for the dollar amount. You save it as a .csv, and then you can import it in accordingly. Now, what will happen in that case? Because if we're importing in just a CSV file containing just the recipients, it'll bring you to the next screen, which is going to show you a request for the subsidiary, a request for the effective date, and also the offsetting account, which will then complete the information needed to create that Nacha file. Once you're done, you would click on Upload File. Now, as I mentioned, for a Nacha file, this needs to be a single batch PPD or CCD. Now, if I click on ACH Pass-Through, this is an alternate solution if you have the need to import in either a multiple batch file or if you need to import in a file that contains a class code outside of PPD or CCD, for example, a web file. Simply click on the Select the File to Upload, select your file, click on Open, and then the process date. The process date is going to be the date that you would like Gulf Coast Bank and Trust to process this file. So what this is going to typically be is the day prior to the settlement date. So if this is payroll or whatever type of transaction and you need the funds to settle on the 27th, you would select the process date of the 26th. Once you're done, you would then click on Approve. Next, we'll click on Tax Payment. So tax payment is an opportunity to initiate either a state or a federal tax utilizing online banking. You'll see here we have Louisiana state tax forms and also federal tax forms. So for example, if we scroll down and we select one of these, we'll say a 941. On the right-hand side, you'll notice a listing of fields that are required that are not yet filled in. So what I can do is I can go ahead and click on payment effective date, tax period end date, the from account, and the dollar amount. Once completed, we can then click on approve or draft, and that will submit the transaction. Next, we're going to briefly touch on subsidiaries. If you do have the opportunity or need to add additional tax IDs into online banking, you can do so in this manner. You can click on Add Subsidiary and then enter the information in here. Click on Create Subsidiary when complete. So next, we also want to mention that we're not going to go through the functionality today, but Positive Pay is also listed right here under the commercial menu. Next, we're going to talk about user management. First off, before I go any further, give me one moment. I'm going to log off, log back on just to refresh our session. And then we'll go into the user management, starting with company policy. Okay, so once again, we're under the commercial menu, and we'll click on company policy. So company policy gives you an opportunity as an administrator to set additional controls across the board for all users of the company. You'll notice a listing of transaction types. We're going to go into one of these and just be aware that all of the transaction types are set up exactly the same as far as workflow. So for this example, we'll go into ACH collection. So you'll notice that there is a concept of draft amount. This gives you an opportunity to set the additional controls. So for example, you can set the draft amount and let's say, for instance, $1,000, or we can make it like maybe 100,000. Set the number of approvals all the way up to 5, all the way down to 1. Subsidiaries, if we need to specify which subsidiary is eligible for ACH collections, along with the corresponding accounts. So even though you might have a certain number of accounts, you can also specify and drill down to decide which accounts are eligible for a certain transaction type. Draft hours. Draft hours gives you an opportunity to decide what days and times you're allowed to draft ACH collections in this case. So for example, we're going to say Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And also always know that everything as far as the system timestamp is going to be Central Time, regardless of where the end user is located geographically. So first what we'll do is we'll click on the days of the week. We'll say Monday through Friday. And then we'll click on the hours of the day. So in this case, we're going to say 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. So we need to deselect the off hours. So I'll click on twice just to deselect. And we'll do the same thing here in the afternoon. So what we have left is 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Now, in addition, if say, for instance, we wanted to exclude a specific hour of a day, we can just click right here on an individual box as well. So next we'll go into location. So what this is this is going to give you an opportunity to decide if you want to restrict based upon the source IP address and the country where that IP address source is from. By default, you'll notice that's going to be set to any, meaning that there is no restriction for the geographic location of the IP. But what you can do is you can click and decide if you wanted to restrict it to countries within North America. Now, keep in mind, this is strictly regarding drafting, not approving. So in this case, I've selected United States, Canada, Mexico. So any IP address sourcing from outside of North America, in this case, will then be denied. And then finally, IP addresses. IP addresses will give you an opportunity to decide if you wanted to restrict based upon IP address or IP address range. So for example, you might decide that you only want to allow ACH collections to be drafted from within an IP address in the company's network. So I'll go ahead and just put in an IP address range here. If I put an asterisk at the end, it means any IP address or any server on this 155.35.22 network. Alternatively, if you wanted to make it really specific, you can actually put in an individual IP address, and that would be the only IP address that would be allowed to draft the transactions. Click on Add, and you can have as many of these as you need. Now we'll go ahead and click on OK. So next we'll talk about approval limits. Now if I click here, you'll notice that this is a read-only screen. It's informational to give you an opportunity to know what your dollar limits for approvals are at the company level for your company. And also just one note, the per month limit is based upon the calendar process date as far as when you want those transactions to be processed. Next, we'll click on features. This is an opportunity for you to decide, this is an opportunity for you to view what other features within the system are available for your specific company. Keep in mind, this is also a read-only screen. And then next we'll go into accounts. The view, deposit, and withdrawal rights for each account is read-only at the company policy level. But what I do want to do is I want to show everybody how to create what we call labels and what they're used for. It's a huge convenience factor, especially if you have a large number of accounts. So I'm just going to eliminate these for right now. And let's say, for example, we want to break these out into, we can do ACH versus wires, company 1 versus company 2, whatever the need is. So let's say, for instance, the first 2 accounts will be ACH accounts. So I can click on Edit Labels after I select my 2 accounts, and we'll call this ACH accounts. Click on Create, Add, and Close. And then we'll do the same thing for the 3rd and 4th account. Click on Edit Labels. We'll call these wire accounts. Click on Create, Add, and Close. So what we have left is we have our ACH accounts and our wire accounts. Now let's show what this is actually used for. So if we go back over to Overview, keep in mind Overview is the landing page of when you click on company policy. And let's go back into ACH collections. So now if we go to the accounts, and let's go ahead and deselect, and let's say instead we want to correspond these accounts, the ACH collection, we're going to click on ACH accounts. So it automatically selects those 2 accounts that we set up in that label. Now keep in mind, these labels correspond with not only ACH collections, but will carry over into all transaction types and also carry over into the next level down, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is user roles. So once we're done, I can click on OK, and then we'll click on Save. Okay, so next we're going to go down to what we call user roles. So a user role is going to be a transaction, is going to be either one or multiple users in the system that have identical entitlements and dollar limits. Consider it to be a job description within online banking. So for example, let's say we have our payroll clerk. So what you'll do is you'll have the entitlements set up at the user role level, and then you can then plug and play your users, just essentially plugging them into that user role that corresponds with their job description. So I'll click here on the pencil, and also keep in mind that you have your edit function, you have your copy, and you have the delete. These icons will remain consistent throughout the entire site. So let's click on Edit, and the first screen that comes up, the first screen is going to be your overview screen, same as the company policy. In fact, you might notice that it looks very, very similar. But when we click on one of the transaction types, we'll talk about the various options within the user roles. So let's click on ACH collection, for example. And the first thing we want to do is talk about operations. So if I click here on operations, this is where you can set a user role to be able to draft, approve, or cancel transactions. But then also we have a fourth item, which is called draft restricted. Draft restricted gives you an opportunity to only allow the users in, like, say, for instance, this is a payroll clerk user role, to be able to work with an ACH collections template that has been assigned to them by an administrator. In this case, they will not have an opportunity to create any new templates, create any one-time payments as far as outside of working with a template, and they won't be able to add, delete, or edit any recipients, only working with the existing template to put a dollar amount, an effective date, and a memo if they choose, and then click on submit to submit the file, and that's it. So draft, approve, cancel, and draft restricted. Once again, we have subsidiaries. Subsidiaries, if in fact this user role is specific to one of the sub-companies, you can decide which one that is. And then accounts. So of course here, we can decide which accounts are going to be utilized for the ACH collection, and then draft hours. So another example could be that you have employees that are working all hours and also on weekends. So you might decide to leave the draft hours open at the company policy level and maybe restrict them further at the user role level instead. So once we're done, we can click on OK. And next we'll talk about rights. So now rights gives you an opportunity to decide for this user role whose transactions they're able to view within the Activity Center. Now recall, Activity Center is the submenu under Transfer Funds, which allows you to view all of the historical transactions that have been initiated from within online banking. This also includes the ability to approve the transaction as well. And just for reference, the approve is going to be an option under Actions when they go and look at that transaction. So for right now, this user role is set to not view any transactions within Activity Center. This first option is where they can view anybody's. This would be more of an administrator, where they can view anybody's transactions that have initiated from within online banking, regardless of their user role or level. This one says that they can only view their own, so they won't be able to see anybody else's transactions, specific to ACH collections in this case. And then this last one is where they can view transactions for themselves and anybody else that shares the same user role. So in this case, if you have 3 payroll clerks, they'll be able to see each other's transactions, but nobody else's. Next, we'll click on approval limits. So approval limits, this is where, if you recall, at the company policy, it was read-only. But now here at the user role, this is where you could essentially change the dollar amount as far as the limits for user role to user role. Right now, I've already have it set to 1,000, which is more restricted than what we have at the company level. Okay, so but we can clear this. We can say like 5,000. We can say 50,000, whatever it is, as long as it is not exceeding the company level entitlements. Same thing for per account per day, and then per month. Next, we'll click on features. If you recall, when we were at the company policy, once again, this was read-only. But now at the user role level, now you can determine which users might be administrators and which users are more sub-users that should not be able to manage other users, manage company policy, user roles, so on and so forth. So this is where you can control that. Then finally, accounts. So you'll notice that in this case, for the user roles, you have the opportunity to decide the view, deposit, and withdraw rights from account to account. Now you can also select or deselect all at once just by clicking on the check marks. On the right-hand side, we have labels. And if you recall, we set these labels up at the company policy level. They're viewable, but they're only read-only here at the user role level. So once I'm done, I can go ahead and click on Save. Now keep in mind, since this is a test environment, it's running a little bit slower than normal. Okay, so a couple more things that we want to talk about with user roles. First off, I'll click on the pencil right up here, and this is an opportunity for you to rename the user role and also put a user-defined description. So at this point, what I like to do is I like to explain what you can expect when you log in for the first time in relation to user roles and your existing users. So all of the users that are right now within the current online banking system will migrate over with the existing dollar limits and entitlements. The difference, though, is that for user roles, each user is going to be placed into their own individual user role, and that user role name is just going to be the user's name. So David Geller would be assigned automatically to the David Geller user role. One thing we do not get from the previous vendor is the job title of each user. So, but what you can do, and it's not something that has to be done on day one, but you can go into each user role, you can change the name of the user roles, and you can also consolidate users into the various user roles, and that's what we're going to talk about next, is user management itself. But one last thing I'd like to mention here in user roles is if I click on, for example, ACH collection, we have what's called a policy tester. And what this does is this is going to give you an opportunity to test your policy, in this case your user role, before you finalize it. So we can go ahead and click here, and let's say that we want to set up a scenario. And I'm just going to randomly choose some items here. And then I can click on test. So what this is going to do is this is going to be a simulation to say whether or not this transaction would be allowed or whether or not it would be declined if the policy was set up. In this case here, looking at the user role, the subcompany C is not the right subsidiary, and then a company policy, same thing here. So it's going to tell me where the concern lies, so that then you can go into the rest of the user role and adjust it accordingly if it's not doing what you expect it to do. So next we'll go into commercial, and we're going to go into manage users. So this will give you a listing of the users, and of course the first thing I want to do is to show everybody how to create a new user. So I'll click on add user, and you'll notice here all the fields are required. So I'll put some information in here, and we'll put an email address. And watch what happens on the right-hand side when I start entering my login ID and password. You'll notice that there's going to be items that will be popping up in red to make sure that we're adhering with the requirements. Okay, so once everything is grayed out, we should be good to go. And then the user role, as I mentioned, the user role is going to be what houses the rights and entitlements and dollar limits. So let's say, for example, that Tom is a payroll administrator. And then we'll click on Save. If we went into the payroll administrator user role, we would see what entitlements that allows Tom to access within online banking. So here's Tom right here. Tom is actually ready at this point. He can actually log in as we speak. He's already set up and ready to go. But now if I click on the pencil, this is my edit. And let's first off say that Tom has been promoted from payroll administrator to senior. Well, let's see, maybe the company admin. Okay, so we can do that. And then we can click on update role. Now be aware that this goes into effect the next time that the user logs into the system. Now, another scenario is that Tom might be leaving the company temporarily, and he might be back, so you decide that you don't necessarily want them to delete him entirely, but you also don't want him to be logging in while he's gone. So you can just simply deactivate the user record. You'll notice that this now turns our user record gray. So at this point, he won't be able to log back in until if you click on the pencil and then click on Activate User, it'll turn him back green. So now he'll have an opportunity to log in once again. Now, another scenario I'd like to point out is for instance, if you have a brand new role of the company. Let's say, for instance, you have a controller, for example, and you want to create a role for the controller that you can then assign to a new user or existing user. The easiest way to do that is if we go here to user roles, and this is where we want to invoke the copy function. So let's say the controller is going to be payroll administrator, just with a little bit more functionality. So we can click on copy instead of doing it all from scratch. So now we can create our controller. So we're going to rename this controller. The description, we'll say, for instance, we'll say this is going to be the controller. And of course, this is user defined and it's not required. Click on continue. And here at this point in time, it brings us into our new user role to where now we can just make whatever changes are needed. So say, for example, also want to point out on the right-hand side, you have the opportunity to maintain these view rights directly from this screen. So let's say we're going to go ahead and add a couple of rights here. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and save our controller. I want to rename it too. I think I missed the T there. Okay, go ahead and close that. And now I can go back over to manage users. And if I need to, I can update one of my existing users or create a new user and assign them to the controller user role. Now, keep in mind that the newest one is always going to be on the bottom. Okay, so one thing I also like to kind of go back to that I inadvertently skipped over is international wires. So let's go ahead and go back over to ACH and wires real quick, and I want to talk about international wires. So I'll click here on new payment, and we'll click on international wire. So now in this case, we're working with the international wire, and let's say, for instance, we want to create a new one-time recipient for international. So I'll click here once again on new recipient, and display name, we'll just say international. Scroll down to the bottom, we'll click on next. But in this case, you'll notice that international, of course, is checked because we're working with the international wire. You'll have the opportunity to decide whether or not the account type is IBAN, SWIFT, or BIC, or you can designate where you can choose both. So let's say, for instance, SWIFT or BIC. All right, so now one thing I do want to point out is that financial institution lookup is only for domestic banks and credit unions, not for international. So in this case here, we'll put our account number in, and then the beneficiary FI, I'll need to actually put the information in for the international bank. So we'll go ahead and say, for instance, Bank of Toronto. Okay, and then the country. Enter the SWIFT or BIC. The address of the bank. And then also the intermediary FI as well. if this is needed. Once you're done, you can click on Use Without Save if this is going to be a one-time recipient, or we can save the recipient if we wanted to also have it available for future use. And then we can go through and just complete the rest of the transaction. Enter our process date. And then at this point, we can click on Draft or Approve. Now, the last item we're going to cover is the reporting feature. So I'll click on Reporting. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a listing of reports that are available to run and also to schedule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on one of these and show how this is done. And then just know that all of the different reports, they all work exactly the same way as far as setting them up. The content, of course, within the reports is going to vary depending on the type of report. So the first thing is file formats. So this is just informational. It's just telling you once this report has been run, what formats it'll be available in. You don't need to select anything here. But what you do need to select is which account or accounts are to be included in this report. Select the date range. So say, for instance, if we wanted to do a dynamic date range like last business day or last week, or we can do a specific date range, such as like maybe the month of September. So we can do September 1st through September 30th. Down here we have schedule. And of course, if this is going to be a one-time, then of course we want to just select none. Okay, if it's just going to be one time, or we can select daily or weekly or monthly. Now, one thing I did inadvertently miss was going to be transaction type. So of course, this is your online ACH online origination. So you need to select which transaction type or transaction types need to be included in this transaction or in this report. Once you're done, you can click on Save and Run. So what that will do is that will save the recurrence, if there is one, and then also runs it on demand. Now, the reports are not actually set up for this user here, so they're not going to run successfully. But essentially what will happen is that once it's been run, you'll see the actual icons here on the screen, and then you'll be able to click on them. A question came up earlier as far as what if you wanted to print out a report. Well, what you'll do is once it's been run successfully, you'll click on, in this case here, this was going to be available in a PDF or an Excel. So we can go back here, and once it was run successfully, you would click on that corresponding icon. It would bring up the report, and then you can click on Print to print that report. But then, of course, then you have a whole listing of different reports that can be run according to what your need is. So that would be the last item of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute and give an opportunity to go through any questions that might come up at this point.
The competition, they have given you false information.
Trial.
Tammy said. You want to work with people like
Tammy
that?
said she corrected the woman. She said, I told her, no, this is
So
wrong.
does anybody have any questions?
This is not.
Guys, your phones are not
I
muted.
don't know how to figure simple interest because this is not what it costs. This is way more than it is.
Okay, so I've muted everybody, and then you can actually unmute yourself if you do have a question, just to minimize background noise.
Does anyone
anybody
have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Where is the remote deposit feature going to be on this new system?
Okay, the remote deposit. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm sorry. The remote deposit feature is going to be right here between transfer funds and commercial. You'll have your own link out to the remote desktop teller service, and it'll operate the same way it does now.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Additional questions?
Trial.
Hello, does anybody have any questions?
Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions coming in, and I also don't see any in the group chat.
Trial.
So I want to thank everybody for joining and taking time to go through this, and
Trial.
we will hopefully speak to each of you soon. Everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you.